saw Roto Force on my Twitter timeline and was instantly attracted to it. It's because its use of colors and the limited arena-like levels stood out to me. At this point in time, there are all sorts of games that do a lot with colors, but I rarely run into games that do something that's different when it comes to level design. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of great 2D and 3D games that have great level design for one or more reasons, but it's been a while since I've seen a game like Roto Force. You'd think that limiting you to a tight-spaced arena would work against you and make you even want to stop playing, but that wasn't the case for me. I was reminded of early PS1 games from the mid-90s where they featured circular levels or cube-like levels that would change when you least expected it. It was a way of straying from what was then considered the norm, but overall, it was an interesting way of keeping you on your toes. Once I actually started playing Roto Force, I noticed that it had simple mechanics, but I knew that would eventually lead to complex gameplay. My first impression was right. You shoot, move/jump around, and that's pretty much what you're able to do. What makes things interesting is how you end up using those basic mechanics in different themed levels and with the wide variety of enemies that Roto Force features. That's something I'll eventually discuss. Something else I liked about Roto Force was how you were able to choose so much from what it had to offer. Whether it was the wide variety of weapons, whether or not to pick up health/power-up items, which definitely forced you to do more than other games would, and being able to start from specific checkpoints. That last one may not be a big deal, but it adds to the game's replayability. Once I reached a certain point in the levels, I'd keep going from there until the very end of the level. I could, however, imagine others starting from specific checkpoints simply to re-experience specific sections of a level, or to face off against a particular kind of enemy. It's really worth noting the great variety of weapons that are available in Roto Force. I mainly stuck to the double helix, grenade launcher, and the basic rapid fire gun, but there were many others that showcased the devs' creativity when it came to this aspect of the game. What's cool is that you're more or less forced to try all the weapons. The game doesn't explicitly push you into doing that, seeing as how you can stick to a single weapon and beat the game as long as you're skilled enough, but since that wasn't doable for me, I'd frequently change up the weapons I was using to try and find something more appropriate. For some it may not be a big deal, but I think it's weird having to make do with weapons that you're not particularly fond of. If it were up to me, I'd just stick to the rapid fire gun, but seeing as how it had its limitations, I was forced to give it a rest every now and then. I liked how the enemies and levels encouraged you to give the other weapons a try even if they weren't your favorite, or if they were from earlier parts of the game. I like to think that a game is well designed if weapons from early on in the game are still effective towards its end. Bottom line, this is great because the variety of weapons offers a lot of opportunities for different playstyles. Speaking of different playstyles, I liked how Roto Force on Steam Deck allowed you to choose from different button schemes to work with. I stuck to the basics, but seeing as how everyone's different and usually want to do things their own way, I thought that this was awesome. Being able to play with custom button schemes isn't new, but on Steam Deck, it was good to go without having to change anything yourself. Every once in a while, I fooled around with these different button schemes, but since they felt awkward to me, I stuck to the basics. Seeing as how Roto Force ended up being harder than I thought it'd be, it was essential to find what worked best for you. Besides choosing which weapons you most enjoyed or which worked best against a specific boss, you'd also have to figure out which mechanics were more useful than others. After some time with Roto Force, I realized that you were partially invincible while you were jumping/dodging around. I know that it's a cheesy tactic to make use of, but seeing as how some levels/bosses were harder than I thought they'd be, I used every advantage I could. I want to say that Roto Force is somewhere between hard and impossible. It's manageable for around 80% of the game, but since I didn't beat what I assume was the final boss, that's why I described it how I did. I like to think of myself as a skilled player, and some of the games I've beaten showcase that, but I felt that Roto Force stacked the odds against me in specific ways. It's true that there's a wide variety of weapons to choose from, and you can take simple mechanics and twist them around to your particular playstyle, but there were parts where it was clear that there was a huge difference between them and earlier parts of the game. The majority of the game was hard yet fair, but two particular sections stood out to me because of how hard they were. The first involved me spending 2 straight hours on a single boss. You'd think that after an hour I'd be getting close to rage quitting, but seeing as how it was fun, it was easy to keep trying over and over again. It also helped that Roto Force made me forget about time. My hands were killing me and I was putting off chores/responsibilities, but I wanted to keep playing because I saw that it was possible for me to overcome this difficult situation. I wish I could say it was the same for the last boss, but then I'd be lying. Roto Force makes it clear that this particular level is harder than the rest, but I figured that by this point I was skilled enough to overcome whatever was thrown my way. Unfortunately, I was wrong. The overall level was harder not only because of the different enemies you encountered, but also because of its mini-bosses. That's something I skipped over. The further you went into Roto Force, the more you deal with mini-bosses in some of the levels. That helped keep things fresh, and these mini-bosses weren't as hard to deal with as the two bosses I previously mentioned, but they still got in the way of me being able to progress as quickly as I would have liked. By the time I made it to the true boss of the level, I realized that I was in over my head. It took me way too many times to beat its first and second form only to realize that there was a third form. It's fair to say that me being unable to overcome this boss and its subsequent forms says more about me than the game, but at the same time, I felt that the odds were too stacked against me. Previous levels allowed me to collect bonus items that heal or power me up, but that wasn't as present in this one. Once I'd beaten the boss's second form, I'd get 1 heart, but that was too little. Once I'd reached the boss's third form, I was almost always on my last heart. 1 additional heart gave me little hope that I'd be able to overcome all 3 forms back to back. It's possible that I'd be able to beat this boss and its forms if I tried over and over again, but seeing as how I have many more games to cover, I didn't want to devote even more time to a game that I've already seen plenty of. That may lead to some of you thinking less of me, but I'm sure that there are others out there that'll feel the same way that I do. It's possible that a future update will be able to create a better balanced boss fight that's closer to what's offered throughout the rest of the game, but seeing as how I don't see that happening, I feel that my time with Roto Force is over. It might be a strange thing to say, seeing as how I didn't see the credits roll for Roto Force, but based on what I experienced, I think that it'll eventually be seen as a hidden gem. Whenever a Steam sale happens to be taking place, there's always at least one, in reality it's more like a dozen, thread asking for hidden gem indie games. There's just too many good things about Roto Force for it to not be enjoyed by those that end up playing it. I don't think it's a perfect game, but for the amount of fun and playtime I got from it, I was left feeling satisfied. I'd feel even more satisfied if the jump in difficulty from the previous bosses to what I assume is the last one wasn't so high, but what can I do besides complain? Like I just mentioned, Roto Force isn't a perfect game. It does, however, do plenty of things really well. That alone makes it stand above some of the indie games that make it onto Steam or in Nintendo's eShop. Its visuals and interesting battle arena design / functioning was what initially caught my attention, but over time I realized that it was more than just a pretty looking game. A lot of thought went into its mechanics, level design, and how to combine both aspects of the game to create a memorable experience. My only real complaint about Roto Force is that for the type of game that it is, it feels like it's missing the option to allow you to upgrade your health and weapons, whether it be simply having access to more healing items in between sections of the levels, before / after mini bosses / forms, or being able to upgrade how your weapons functioned. It's possible that including that would lead to the game coming off as bloated, but seeing as how it's been done in other games similar to this one, I know it's not impossible to pull off. I usually prefer to play a game to completion, but when the game itself is incomplete, doesn't allow me, or is much more than I can handle within a timely manner, I'd rather just share what I've experienced instead of moving on and not covering it at all. Despite that, I feel comfortable with what I got out of Roto Force. It's a fun game, and depending on whether or not it gets updated or something else that can bring me back to it, I'll do so. If it isn't clear by now, I definitely recommend Roto Force. It has a lot to offer when it comes to its art style, gameplay, and it's simply a fun game. It offers enough options that you won't feel limited to play in one specific manner, and that's a great thing. Due to how its save / checkpoint system works, it's the kind of game that you can easily pick up and play for short sessions. At the same time, it's definitely a possibility to play for longer than you expect to. How do you feel about games that feature levels that are more or less one endless loop? Should games have large jumps in difficulty? At what point do you feel that you've seen enough of a game to want to move on from it? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.